Jaden Ivey's rookie season is coming to a close here soon. How has he progressed through his rookie season? Is he in a better spot now than he was at the beginning of this season? We're going to talk about that in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Kuka Hill. You can find me over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. And if you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons, hit that subscribe button, or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. And today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Basketball GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NBA GM and managing your basketball franchise? Then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimatebasketballgm.com or look it up in the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON, all caps, in the game. So later on in the podcast, we'll talk about James Wiseman's progression since joining the Pistons and the whole dynamic of him starting versus Jalen Duren coming off the bench recently. Is that something we're going to see moving forward? And then also, if the Pistons were to fall outside the top two, we're just going to briefly talk about, are they in a good position with the prospects that are in this upcoming draft? Should the Pistons fans be worried if they fall out top two? Are they in a good position still? Now, again, we're just going to briefly talk about that. Trust me, the full-on draft coverage is coming soon, so just stay tuned for that. But we'll briefly talk about that a little bit later as well. But first, we're going to talk about Jaden Ivey's progression through his rookie season. He just tweeted out the whole little Goku coming back to life thing that LeBron James be tweeting out when he feels like he's coming back from an injury or whatever. He just tweeted that out, so I assume he's going to be coming back from injury soon. But to join us to talk about Jaden Ivey's rookie season thus far, friend of the podcast, Bryce Simon, host of the Pistons Pulse podcast. Bryce, so Jaden Ivey's rookie season, I think at the beginning of the year, there was a lot of reason to be happy with him, but I feel like at the beginning of the year, his weaknesses were very much on display. It was very obvious what he struggled with and what he needed to improve on. We're sitting here on March 15th. How do you feel about where he's at now? Do you feel like those weaknesses have been improved on? Do you feel like his weaknesses are still as glaring as they were at the beginning of the year? Just how do you feel about his rookie season thus far?
I think there's still one glaring weakness, and maybe we can talk about that. I'm sure we're going to have the same one or feel the same way about it. I will say this, Koo. I think the most impressive thing from Jaden Ivey this year on the offensive end has been the pace that he's able to play with, like operating in ball screens, putting defenders in jail, snaking screens, changing his speeds. Because coming out of Purdue, what everybody only talked about how fast he was. And make no mistake, he is a lightning bolt from one end of the court to the other. Probably one of the top 5 fastest players from one end of the court to the other. Right. But his ability to slow down, especially in the half court, has been really encouraging. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff around that, Koo, but to me, that's been the biggest thing.
So I think, and like you said, I've mentioned this on the podcast a lot, the one area that I feel like he's definitely improved on from the start of the season to now, it's exactly what you just said. And I'm going to take you into a different route, not just like with his pacing, but like with his control of his own body. At the beginning of the year, when he would go for a pull-up jumper or he'd go in between area, between the three-point line and the rim, his body would be flying all over the place. He wouldn't be under control at all on his pull-up jumpers. He'd be flying forward on floaters. And now when you see him take a pull-up jumper, it's very compact, very under control. When he takes his floaters, he usually lands in the same spot he jumped from on his floaters. Like, he seems much more under control and comfortable in the in-between area. That right there is the biggest place I've seen him grow. There's been a lot of other areas that he's grown in since the beginning of the year. It's been a fun rookie player to watch, see how he, what he struggled with at the beginning of the year and see it in lifetime get better as the months have went on. So it's been cool to see that from him. But number one on my list by far is his comfortability in the in-between area, because that was the part and in preseason, heck, even when we saw some clips from like the Rico Hines runs, like that in-between area, he looked very I believe he had one run to go off the top of the backboard. Like it was rough. So to see where he's at, it was rough. To see where he's at now is such a big improvement on where he was. So that's by far number one on my list. What's another area you believe he's improved on?
Yeah, and what you said about his body control, Koo, is so right. Because I remember scouting him coming out of college, and even the mid-range shots he did take, even the ones he made, like you couldn't believe in him because his legs are flailing and he's falling. It's like he's like, I don't even know if this is real stuff. So huge improvement there. I think the 3-point, I don't know, what is it, like 33, 34% right now? I'm not saying it's like nobody's going to call him a knockdown shooter. And even the form, like I don't think he's ever going to be 38, 39, 40%. But even at 33%, you can, and we've seen him make big shots. We've seen him off the dribble, in transition, all of those things. I think that's been a really encouraging sign from Jaden Ivey that maybe he's even 35%. And if he's at 35%, then you can play him with essentially anybody else. And so that's been a big surprise for me as well, because I wouldn't have been shocked if he was 30% or below this season.
So to back up your point there, his three-point shooting on unguarded catch and shoot threes, according to Synergy, he's in the 84th percentile. So he's one of the best. Yes, he's one of the best players in the entire NBA when it comes to shooting wide open catch and shoot threes. Now, when they're guarded, he's one of the worst in the NBA. He's
do you have off screens, Koo? Like, do you have that handy? If not, that's okay.
I don't believe so.
I would just be curious because, like, eventually we're going to have this conversation around him and Cade playing together. And one thing I want to remind people of, going back to Purdue, they did have him running off like staggered screens. And it's not just to get shots. Obviously, you can get downhill, go back to the first summer league play last summer where he threw the lob to Duren. But I just was curious, what his shooting numbers were off screens if you had him handy.
Well, I actually just found them. So they say he only has 11 possessions this year going off screen.
That makes sense.
And for what it's worth, in those 11 possessions, he's in like the 98th percentile. But that's such a small sample size that
you can barely count it.
Yeah, but then they have someone coming off some handoffs. That's 30 possessions. He's 12th percentile, so he wasn't very good off of that. Yeah,
that's interesting.
So just wanted to back up your shooting point. He's been really good on open catch and shoot threes, but definitely I agree with you. I did not think that he would be that good of a shooter on open shots, at least. Another area that I think he's improved on a ton this season, and it kind of correlates with when they went away from Killian Hayes really as the point guard and went full Jaden Ivey point guard experience, and you got to see him improve as a playmaker. Look at some of these assist numbers over the last 18 games. I just picked a random date. Just look at some of these assist numbers. 11 assists, 8, 5, 7, 6, 5, 8, 7, 10, 13, 12. He's improved as a playmaker. Now, some of these games he's had high turnovers, and you expect that with a rookie, with his inexperience and kind of being thrown into the fire with a team who's been hurt, not a lot of talent around him. But just simply his improvement as a playmaker, and that goes back to, I guess, in his in-between game, being able to be comfortable and knowing that, what the read is here, who I need to find. I think that's been a big thing with his development too, just his playmaking overall. I've been really happy with how it's progressed from November, October to where we are now.
Yeah, I mean, he puts so much pressure on the lane, Koo, that he's going to create opportunities to get guys open shots. And then it's just about, like you said, he doesn't have to be a high-level read guy like Killian Hayes, like Cade Cunningham. He doesn't have to do those things because he has a different level of physical attribute that those guys simply don't. And he can put pressure on the lane. He can put pressure on the rim at such a high rate. He's going to draw help. And then it's just like, okay, he has to read one defender. Did he help off the corner or did he stay? Did they help off the weak side or did they stay? Do I throw the lob or do I kick it out for the three? And those are reads that he can make. You're not asking him to be a maestro making some of the plays, like I say, that Killian and Cade make out of ball screens and manipulating the defense with their eyes. And I mean, we see Jaden throw some dimes, don't get me wrong, but just the simple plays. And that's all he has to do because, again, he puts so much pressure on the lane.
All right, so before we wrap up this segment, just real briefly, what's one area that you are still, I don't want to say disappointed, but you want to see that he has to improve on that he hasn't so far this year?
So I think the biggest area of improvement is defense. Like, that hasn't been good all year. It's been a little bit better. But I want to shout out Joe Truck, your guy. Him and I went back and forth when we were doing the playbacks about this. And he essentially was like, James got to be better finishing around the rim. And I was like, no, I'd rather see him improve in the mid. Like, Joe was right. Jaden hasn't been as good as what you would want finishing around the rim. He misses a lot of what I would consider easy layups, at least for an NBA guy. So that will probably be the main area I look for next season is Jaden Ivey's finishing efficiency around the rim.
So to back up that point, he's actually been very, very bad as a finisher this year. He's in the 11th percentile at the rim. That's pretty bad. I expect that to get better. If you believe in Jaden Ivey, I assume that you'd expect that to be better moving forward. The area I'm going to go with is defense. I think defense is my biggest concern with him. I think it could really hold him back from where he can get to. And from the people I've talked to and talking to scouts and stuff, they say he was a really horrific defender in college too. This is something that tracks going back years. So I think that's going to be the one thing that if he can't become like at least a passable defender and like an average defender or something like that, I think that really will hold him back at like when the Pistons are trying to win in playoff scenarios, etc. So I think he needs to improve in that area. That's the biggest area for me.
Yep.
Coming up, want to talk about James Wiseman, Bryce? He's played really well outside this past game, but over the last few games, he had been playing really well. We're also seeing him start over Jalen Duren. What's going on with that? Is that the right move? We'll talk about all that when we come back. But first, I got to tell you guys about one of our sponsors, Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. I'm really geeked out by a new partner and sponsor of today's episode, the mobile game Ultimate Pro Basketball GM. You ever dreamed of becoming an NBA GM and managing your basketball franchise? Well, your dream can come true with this game is definitely for you as well. Manage every strategic aspect for your team, play through the season, and lead your team to glory. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches and assistants, trading and training players, making draft picks, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, and through all the ups and downs of the season. All this is challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want when you want to. And if you look at the screen for those of you guys on YouTube, you'll see right here, I got one started. I got the Pistons, or it's not the Pistons, but it's the Detroit team. I got to start. I don't have much success at all yet. This game is pretty tough to play, man. If you guys are listening on YouTube or even on the podcast, man, go hit up Locked On Bulls. They won an NBA championship back-to-back years. I don't know how they've done it. I think they're cheating, but I'm still struggling with how to get this thing going. I'm looking like the real-life Pistons over the last 10 years, but maybe you guys would look better. Definitely, if you guys check this game out and you play, pick the Detroit team and send me screenshots if you guys have good seasons, because I've yet to have a good season yet. But it's definitely a really cool game. Probably one of my favorite sponsors we've done for the Locked On Pistons listeners. By the way, you guys get 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game store. So make sure you check it out. To download the game, just visit probasketballgm.com, scan the code, or look it up on the app stores. That's probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. Real quickly, Bryce, I think you would really like this game, this little Ultimate Basketball GM game.
So I didn't realize there was a basketball version. So for those that know, I'm a Chiefs fan, so I listen to Locked On Chiefs also. Like it's you and then Locked On Chiefs. I also listen to Locked On Big Board. So, or NBA Draft Big Board, Raphael and Richard and all those guys. But the Chiefs guys are always promoting it, and I'm like, man, that sounds like a lot of fun. I didn't even know there was a basketball version, so I'm going to have to check it out.
It's tough, dude. I'm telling you, I'm coming out here looking like a scrub. I've been trying to. I raged on it a few times. You think I'm playing 2K on Xbox or something, but it's definitely a fun game. I actually think it's pretty dope. But anyways, let's move on. So James Wiseman, Bryce, I don't believe we've had you on the podcast since the trade with James Wiseman. So don't think we're going to have a ton of time to talk about your thoughts on just the James Wiseman trade in general, unless, of course, you want to hit on it real quick at the beginning of your response. But how have you been? We're going to go through different areas with James Wiseman. But first, just like, again, if you want to talk about your thoughts with the trade itself and then quickly move into what have you thought about his play since arriving, specifically over the last week and a half or so?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's been good. The only thing I want to say about the trade, coup, this is all I want to say. Everybody who said that James Wiseman had no chance of being good was very frustrating to me because he'd only played 1,000 minutes total. When he arrived in Detroit, coup, James Wiseman had played less career minutes than Jalen Duren. So, I just was very frustrated when people tried to tell me James Wiseman can't be good. Maybe he's not good, coup. Maybe he won't be. But you can't tell me we know for a fact after 1,000 minutes of his career. And you talk to Warriors people, and he wasn't in a great situation there. Now, I think we've seen the positives of James Wiseman, right? He's long, he's blocked some shots, he can score around the basket. And then we've seen flashes. What was really intriguing to me was like, could he be this grab and go big man? Could he play the floor? Could he shoot? Could he rip and go from the 3-point line? And this isn't me like being super negative because we've only seen like 8 games with Wiseman, 10, something like that. We haven't seen as much as what I thought. Essentially, either by his choice or the Pistons' choice, he's kind of just been a paint player. And so we haven't seen him use the way I thought we were. So it's not a disappointment. It hasn't went the way I thought, I guess, if that makes sense.
So he's been a Piston for 12 games. Over those 12 games, it's been 13 points, 9 rebounds on 54% shooting. But he has picked it up as of late. If you go over the last if you go over the last 9 games, that goes up to 14 and 9 on 55% shooting. And then if you go over the last, you go over the last 5 games, you're up to 16 and 10 on 54% shooting. So he's hovering around the same efficiency throughout the time. But as he's played more, you're starting to see him get more comfortable. I think the teammates and the team itself get more comfortable with him, what to do with him offensively. Just real quickly, want to give you my thoughts on Wiseman so far. I think he's shown a lot of promise. He's very talented offensively. His touch around the rim I really like it. His hook shot barely goes over the rim, but it goes in. I don't know how it goes in. He has no arc on it at all, but it just goes straight through the net. I'm really interested with what they want to do with him offensively because I think he's flashed so many different things offensively. You see why he went number 2 because of how talented he is. How it's raw, but he's so talented on so many different areas offensively. So I'm really interested to see how they evolve with using him. And then also defensively, I've seen I think he's been very inconsistent defensively, but some of his flashes defensively have left me very encouraged with what he possibly could become. But I think he's played about as good, maybe even better than some people thought he would arriving with the Pistons. And I'm comfortable with him and Duren being your 5s of the future, to be honest. I'm really cool with it, at least going into next year and the next few years. Like I really like it. But I want to segue that into obviously Wiseman and Duren. And over the last few games, we've seen Wiseman now start over Duren. Now, when this trade happened, I went live on the YouTube channel, Locked On Pistons. I obviously recorded a few episodes about it. And in the live, in the comment section, in my DMs, tweeting at me, all my listeners were like, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them were like, don't like this trade because it will cut into Jalen Duren and they're not going to prioritize Jalen Duren. And I responded with, that's ridiculous. It makes no sense. They'll back him up. If anything, they'll play them together. Jalen Duren's still a priority. He's the number 1 guy. And then Jalen Duren came back from injury. He came off the bench. I said, well, they did this the last time Jalen Duren came back from injury. He sat the first game. Then the following game he came off the bench. I was like, oh, maybe he's still on a minutes restriction. Then the next 2 games happened, and Jalen Duren's still coming off the bench. And now I'm like, okay, for those of you guys who were concerned about this, you guys may have like leeway. Like you guys may have a point here now. What do you feel, or how do you feel about them starting Wiseman over Duren the last few games? Do you think that's something they're going to do moving forward, or do you think we're just overreacting?
I don't, but I understand why there are questions because it doesn't necessarily make sense to me either, especially after a couple games, right? Like we see this all the time. First game back, you come off the bench, you said it, minutes restriction, all of that. I don't know that it's a big deal because I feel like Duren's still going to get the amount of minutes. Like maybe there's something with the lineup. Maybe it's just like, hey, we saw Jalen Duren for all of these games. Like I said, already had more minutes in his career than James Wiseman. And they know, like, hey, we know who Jalen Duren is. We know he's our starting center of the future. Let's throw James Wiseman in this situation. Let's just see what he has as well. So I understand the questions and the confusion. I just think everything we heard about how high the organization was on Jalen Duren in this draft, like I just don't see it unless Wiseman just pops some. And if Wiseman, is that the worst case, Koo? Like if Wiseman is that good to unseat Jalen Duren, then that means he's really good. And now you have an incredibly good backup center as well in Jalen Duren. And I just want to say this too. I thought Marvin Bagley III was playing really well also. I thought he had looked good through, whenever he came back from injury also. And I don't mind bringing all 3 of those guys back because we see it, injuries, foul trouble. Like Is it the worst thing to have all three of those guys on the roster next year for 82? I don't know that that's a bad thing.
Right. So I want to segue this into something you just talked about. So you mentioned bringing back all three of those guys. Are you counting Stu as a big guy? Or are you counting him as?
I'm counting Stu as a 4. I think that's what they're gonna do with him. If you don't want to believe in Stu as a starting 4, I'm completely cool with. And I'm not saying you specifically. I'm just saying in general as fans, because I don't even know if I believe in Stu as a starting 4. But I do think Stu can be a backup 4. I do think he can do that. And so, like, in my mind, I see Stu as a backup 4. You got to find a starting 4. Maybe it's Boyan. We'll talk draft stuff, free agency. But then you have those 3 centers. And I would prioritize them: Duren, Wiseman, Bagley.
All right. So I want to say with Wiseman and Durham real quickly. I think they should be starting Duren over Wiseman. But I agree with you as well that as long as they're both getting the minutes that we want them to get, it's not too big of a deal for the rest of the year. And they very well could be doing what you said with, we've seen Duren for 60-some games. We know what we want with Duren. We know he's our guy for the future. But we want to get Wiseman as much reps as possible and see what he looks like. And that's what this is for at the end of the year. I completely would understand that as well. But all the people that were telling me this is going to come to Jalen Duren, I just want to say you guys might be right, but I'm still going to wait for a minute. Like, I think it's a reasonable thing to bring up, and I'm definitely going to be watching for it now. But I'm just going to wait. I'm gonna wait until I'm gonna wait a few more games before I go like too into it.
So here's the thing with starting Wiseman is you get. Other teams are resting their guys also. So like we played the Pacers twice and didn't get to see him against Miles Turner, but maybe they want to see him against the other team's best players. If that
and
makes
we just
sense.
saw that with Porzingis. Porzingis gave him a hell of a job.
Yeah, there you go. So like instead of starting Duren and then you see Wiseman, well, we've seen Wiseman against backups. Like he's, we know he's going to do that. So the flip side is let's see Wiseman against Kristaps Porzingis and let's let Duren get some confidence or whatever, against backup guys. So maybe there's some of that also. Like who did he get his minutes against maybe playing into this?
Fair enough. And then just real quickly, I just want to say on your point of bringing all 3 of those guys back, my concern, and we've talked about this before, if you're bringing Bagley back to be, now injury is completely fair, obviously, but if you're bringing Bagley back to be the third big, you're essentially paying your third big $13 million.
I know.
And I'm not, I don't know if I'm cool with that. Also, Bagley himself has really bad injury concerns. We talked about this on the last 2 podcasts ago. I'm just going to since Bryce brought it up, I'm just going to say this and we can move on to the draft. That contract looks worse today than it did even in the offseason, dude. He's played, it's going to go now. Probably we're going on 4 years of him not cracking 50 games played in a season. He's not going to crack 40 games this year. Forget all the on-court stuff. But the fact you gave him a 3-year fully guaranteed with no way out.
No option.
Right, yeah. With no way out, no option to a guy that hasn't even played like 50 games yet over the last 4 years. It's concerning. It's concerning to me.
They even put non-guarantee on Boyan's contract.
Right.
Like every contract Troy ever does. We see it, Coot, right? A new contract from Troy Weaver. We see the numbers and then we wait as Pistons fans. Player option, team option, or non-guarantees in the last year. You just know it's coming. And that's the only contract where it didn't happen. I will say this. Teams always need a contract in this range as a salary filler. So again, you're not wrong. Like I'm not contradicting what you're saying. Like at the end of the day, you didn't pay him just to be a salary filler, but that $12 million could end up being beneficial just in terms of, hey, we need to salary match player X superstar that they're going to trade for if that comes about. Like that's all I'm saying is it's not the worst in that situation.
No, yep. And I've said that on the podcast a lot. That's probably the best outlook I have on it as well. So, but coming up, we're going to talk about the NBA draft a little bit. We're not going full-fledged yet with Locked On Pistons draft coverage. It's coming soon, though. But Bryce has been doing a lot of draft stuff. I want to ask him, how should Pistons fans feel if they were to fall out of the top 2? And, heck, maybe even after the top 1, because it sounds like some people are trying to say that Scoop maybe isn't the second guy to go here. So maybe if they fall out past the 1, should the Pistons feel good? Should Pistons fans still feel good falling out of 1? We'll talk about that coming up. But first, I got to tell you guys about one of our sponsors, your guys' favorite sponsor, Built Bar. The Built March Madness bracket is here. We know you have a favorite bar or puff, and now's your time to make it count. Go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorite team. So, Bryce, let me ask you a question real quick. Who do you think has the best chance in March Madness?
I picked Marquette in my bracket that I did last night. Marquette's either going to be like first weekend out, or they're going to carry this Big East tournament momentum and just continue to run. I don't know. I feel like it's really open though.
Fair enough. So you can go, I'll tell you this, you can go to BuiltMarchMadness.com. Not only can you vote for Marquette, but you can also vote for your best or your favorite bar or puff bar from Built Bar. My favorite is the peanut butter flavor. Obviously, I'll be voting for that one. And when you vote for your favorite bar or puff, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built Bars. Bryce, I know you've been waiting for them to send you a box of Built Bar. Maybe that's your best way of getting it right there. Not only that, but one Locked On fan will win a 12-month subscription to Built Bar and have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You got to try Built Bar. Built, the best protein bar ever. Seriously, they're so amazing that you won't think that they're good for you, but they are. What makes Built Bars and puffs so good? Well, for starters, they're all high in protein, low in sugar, and covered in 100% real chocolate. You guys know I don't lie about that. It is 100% real chocolate. Run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick at BuiltMarchMadness.com. Then I got to tell you guys about another one of our sponsors, FanDuel Sportsbook. We're way past actually the midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 as bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to threes drained. And some player props that I've been taking recently, when Jaden Ivey's in the lineups, I've been taking over on his assist. With him out the lineup, I've been taking the over on assists and points with Killian Hayes. Last night, I got bit with his assist. He came one assist short, but he did hit the points. The last few games, he had hit both the points and assists. So those are some props right there I'd stick with if I were you guys. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine those bets for a chance at a bigger payout with same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you are listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. All right, so we're going to touch briefly on some draft stuff. So, Bryce, the Pistons, as of right now, have a 1-game lead on the #1 pick over the Houston Rockets. I really think it's just a two-way fight with Detroit and Houston. I don't think San Antonio, I don't think the Pistons or Houston is going to win enough games to where San Antonio could catch up. And obviously Charlotte's way out of it. So it's between those two teams. Right now, the Pistons are #1. Before we ask Bryce anything, we're going to go ahead and sim lottery at Tankathon. Let's see how it goes. Oh, the Pistons only fall to 2 here. So the last few times, the Pistons have fallen to 5 with me, and we've just acted like that didn't happen. This time, they fall to 2. So I think actually that's amazing for what we want to talk about here. So, Bryce, let's say this happens for the Detroit Pistons. They fall to 2. There's a few questions I want to ask you, but the first one will be, in this one, Houston is 1. So Houston goes 1. They get Wemby. Mm-hmm. Number 2, I feel like a few months ago, it was basically Scoot and Wemby. Mm-hmm. Once Wemby goes, Scoot by far number 2 guy. You get him, and then the draft really starts at 3. First question I want to ask is do you believe that it's still that case? Is it starting to look a little bit more close between the name I've heard is Brandon Miller? Do you still think there's a gap between, or did you ever think there was a gap between Scoot and the next prospect, or do you think it's much closer now and we may even see another guy go at 2?
Yeah, I had a pretty decent gap between. I've always thought Victor was in a tier of his own, then Scoot in a tier of his own, and then I had a bunch of other guys in the next tier. I would say at the very least now, Koo, it's still Victor, Scoot, and then honestly, I think there's an argument that Brandon Miller is now in the tier of his own at number 3, or maybe in that tier with Scoot Henderson. And I want to make this clear, because I know there's a lot of people that don't like Scoot, don't believe in Scoot, all of that, and everybody's entitled to their opinion. Brandon Miller becoming part of Scoot's tier is about Brandon Miller's play on the court, not Scoot Henderson. Scoot is still the prospect that everybody thought he was. Brandon Miller has been that dude and has improved a lot throughout this season.
So, and just real quickly with Scoot Henderson, because there's been a lot of stuff I've seen from Pistons fans incorrectly citing his 3-point percentage for this.
It's very confusing in fairness.
Yes. So I believe that the percentage that people are putting out there, or some people have been putting out there, is what, like 26%, and it's actually 32.5, I believe it is, on the season.
Yeah, so like the G League needs to get this fixed, for one. It's so hard to find good G League stats, which is ridiculous. But if you just look at the G League regular season, it's like 27. But there was also like a 6-game showcase, which is part of the G League season, that they separate out. And he shot lights out in that. So players do this all the time, right? Like they go on 6-game stretches where they shoot really well, and that affects the overall shooting percentage. So yeah, I think when you combine them, it's like 32% or something, like, which I saw someone tweet this is actually an improvement. Someone's like, well, why hasn't he improved? He has improved his 3-point shot from last year to this year. And he's 18 years old. Like, that's the other thing. Like, he's 18 playing against – everybody brings up, like, well, Saben Lee dominates. Saben Lee's 25, played 4 years of college, and, has all sorts more experience than Scoot Henderson.
So there's a few questions I want to ask you. This one, just briefly answer. I asked you this last year. I don't know if you have a better feel on it. I don't want to spend too long on it, but just real quickly, since you brought up G League, do you have a better feel on what, like, is it harder to play in the G League than college? Do you feel like that's a tougher competition for players to be playing against, or do you think it's hard to quantify?
I think it's hard. Like, I definitely, as someone that scouts these guys, I definitely feel more confident scouting college players. I will readily, and the OTE is a whole nother thing, like with the Thompson twins. And I'm sure you'll want to talk about those either today or at some point. But yeah, I mean, you're talking about dudes that are like first-round draft picks are playing in the G League right now. You know what I'm saying? So like, and multiple on a team, and 30-year-old grown men. I don't care. When you're 30, your body is different than when you're 18. So I do just think that aspect of it, if nothing else, is harder in the G League.
All right, so let's get back to what I wanted to ask you now. If the Pistons were to fall, so let's remove Wemby and Scoot from this conversation. And let's go ahead and say Miller too. Let's go ahead and remove those guys from the conversation. Let's say the lottery happens. Worst case scenario, the Pistons fall to 5.
Okay.
Should Pistons fans, in your opinion, and be honest here, whether that's painfully negative or really positive, just be honest. Should Pistons fans still feel like this season was worth it, or do you think they should feel a little bit of a disappointment if they fall to 5?
Disappointment. Like, if you want me to, you always get on me about not giving straight up.
Fair enough.
Here's the thing. Victor, throw a party. Cool. Victor Wembanyama is huge for the city of Detroit, let alone just the Detroit Pistons as an organization. Scoot, I know there's all these, like, he's still a big-time prospect. Brandon Miller, I'm still extremely excited. If the Pistons fall to 3 and they get Brandon, because there's no question he's the perfect fit for this team, Coop. There's no question if you want to talk fit. When you get past that, Amin and Asar are exciting, but I'm a little uneasy. Cam Whitmore, I could get excited, but it's a little uneasy. Jarris Walker's like a good player, but does he change the trajectory of your organization? And then after that, like, dudes, no. So at least they're going to stay in the top 5 or 6, where all those guys I just named, you should be able to get at least one of them.
All right. So I'm going to put you on the spot now. Sorry, but I have to do it. I have to do it. So if they fall to 5, the current mock draft on Tankathon at least has it going Victor 1, Scoot 2. They have Amin still going 3, Thompson, and then 4, Brandon Miller. If that's how the draft were to go, as of right now, as of March 15th, where would you want the Pistons to go?
I would probably go Cam Whitmore out of Villanova.
Give it a little bit of an explanation on Whitmore, and then we can wrap it up.
Yeah, so Whitmore is an explosive 2-foot athlete whose shot has really developed, and I think you can believe in it. And then he has shown flashes, and that you say this about a lot of college guys, Koo, has shown flashes of a really high-level defender. So it's like, I don't know. Like, you don't want to compare him to, like, imagine Sadiq Bey, straight line driver, right? But big time 2-foot athlete. And then the defensive chops that we all wish that Sadiq had. Like, that's kind of what you're seeing with Cam Whitmore. Passing, no. Not something he's great at. A ton of wiggle, no. But it looks like the shot is real. The 2-foot explosion is real, Koo. Like, it's real. And like, he can finish around the basket and all of that. And then again, the defensive flashes are very, very intriguing. So I would probably go Cam Whitmore just because, like, I don't know what to think about the Thompson twins still.
All right, so this is the last question I'll ask you, and it's going to be a longer question. So follow with me here. I've said in the podcast now over the last few weeks that I feel like the Pistons are not as far as some people may think from competing or making the play-in. I feel like they just need some wings. I honestly feel really good with their front court. I feel really good with their back court. I think they could come back next year with Cade, Ivey, and then Duren starting, and then we'll get to the 3 and 4 spot later. That's part of the question.
Yeah.
But then as the backups, you could come back with Killian Hayes, Wiseman, Stu, Livers if you want
Burks
at those positions, and then Wiseman too. Yeah, Wiseman, and then plug in like around them. I feel like you could do that, and you could compete for the play-in with the improvement of players. Cade coming back, but that comes back because I feel this way because I feel like their wing room is the worst in the NBA, and if they improve that wing room, they would become infinitely better. You've named a few wings at the top of the draft. My question to you is, one, real quickly, we don't have much time left, but one, do you agree with that sentiment? Do you feel differently? And then secondly, I've talked a lot on the podcast about the possibility of the Pistons using their second round pick attached to Burks or maybe even Bojan to then move up into the draft. Do you think that there's wings, or maybe even, I know me and you texted about this a few weeks ago, about maybe a backup 2 guard to put next to Killian Hayes, if you believe that it can happen, a point of attack guy that can space the floor. Do you believe they're either that or wings that they can stack up their wing room or that position I just mentioned at the back of the draft? Do you think that's something they could do? Those 2 questions right there is the last ones I have.
Yeah, so I'm with you. I think it would require a free agent, right? Like, if they draft Cam Whitmore, then if you brought in, let's throw out Jeremy Grant just for the sake of engagement and fun. And then, cool. Now, I mean, whether you start Bojan or Cam Whitmore, now you got Killian, Burks, Bojan / Cam Whitmore, Stu, and Wiseman coming off the bench. Like, are you kidding me? That's a really nice second unit with a starting unit that may be young and a little bit unproven, but, could still be good. So there's a world where that happens. Absolutely. The other one is I like that. So what I think this draft has a lot of is wingy shooters. So these guys that are what you're talking about that can knock down shots. Now, they're not all going to last, but let me just run through the list real quick, and fans will recognize them. Bryce Simon, Ohio State. Grady Dick at Kansas. Jet Howard, Michigan guy. Max Lewis is out of the WCC. Pepperdine. Jordan Hawkins, a little bit more of a guard. Taylor Hendricks, again, some of these guys aren't all going to last. Derek Whitehead at Duke. Like, there's a lot of these dudes that can really shoot it that I think the Pistons could get, if they got back into that range. So I like that idea a lot of getting back into the first round and taking one of those guys that may fall a little bit.
All right, so we'll wrap up the podcast there. I'm putting Bryce in the spot one last time. I keep lying and saying this last time, but last thing I'm putting you on the spot for, do you think that happens? Do you think that Troy Weaver does move back into the first round with Burks or Bojan to get another first? Yes or no?
I don't think so. I think they have the high enough second round pick. They're just going to stay there and use that one.
All right, fair enough. Thank you, Bryce, for coming on. Make sure you guys go check out Bryce and Omari, the Detroit Pistons beat writer over at Pistons Pulse podcast every Tuesdays, I believe. Correct?
Yep.
And then also you have a lot of your draft stuff going on where?
Draft Digest. So if you go to si.com/draft digest, that's every day, multiple different articles coming from different writers, or you can find it at Detroit Bad Boys. I link all my stuff there as well.
All right, definitely you guys go check that out. Thank you, Bryce, for coming on, man. Appreciate you guys listening. Appreciate you guys making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Sorry the podcast went a little bit longer, but you guys know that usually happens when I get guests on, especially Bryce. Thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe. Go Pistons, and peace out.